thought you knew how to play the game? But no one has played this hard, this fast, this real, until now. Come, look into the world of Sega Saturn.
Last year, one of my best friends gave me several cardboard boxes. Inside were a Sega Saturn, a stack of games, and a stack of official Sega Saturn magazines. He'd moved house a while before that, and I'd urged him a couple of times to set up the console and give it a go, which apparently led him to the conclusion that I'd get a lot out of owning it, whereas all he was getting was a stack of boxes taking up space in his home. One lazy Sunday afternoon, with nothing better to do, I was going through the stack of magazines, as you do, and came across this issue. Something immediately jumped off the cover and caught my attention. I'm sure you can see what it is without me pointing it out. It's this bit right here, obviously. Blown Away, Blue Stinger, Dreamcast, Resident Evil Beta. Holy mother of fingers, that's a lot of exclamation marks. Several questions immediately sprung to mind. My first and most immediate question was, what the hell is Blue Stinger? It's not a game I'd ever heard of before seeing this magazine. Not that that on its own means very much. Plenty of good or interesting games have fallen through the cracks of history, a fact I'm becoming all too familiar with as I make my way through the libraries of older consoles like the Saturn. Resident Evil 2 was one of the first games I truly fell in love with, and one that pulled me into gaming as something more than a thing I occasionally did when I was between new books to read. I once made a dubious PowerPoint presentation about the series. I've been speedrunning the remake of RE2. I throw myself into absurd challenge runs of Resident Evil games on Twitch. I'm the Resident Evil gal of my gaming group, basically. So it was the declaration that Blue Stinger was Dreamcast's Resident Evil Beta that really intrigued me. Not that I was under the impression that maybe the magazine was right and this game was in any way a Resident Evil Beta. Hindsight had already proven that point false. It's been almost 30 years. Resident Evil is still going strong as one of gaming's biggest horror franchises, and Blue Stinger has faded from most people's memories, including mine. I quickly flipped through the magazine to see what they had to say about the game, trying not to get distracted by the incredibly in-depth Dead or Alive 2 preview along the way. There were a couple of quite interesting sections that I'm going to save for later in the video. 5 seconds of additional Google research led me to an IGN review of the game that had this to say.
The great visuals, great music, brilliant creature design, varied gameplay, incredible boss encounters, and deep puzzles make the Blue Stinger experience enjoyable, to say the least.
I always hate that phrase in a review. Don't say the least. Say more. Say the most. That's why I'm reading your review. That small tangent aside, this review blurb and the magazine cover were enough to convince me to give Blue Stinger a try. That and I found a copy of the game for 30 quid. So, let's play a Blue Stinger and see what it's all about. We get an opening title crawl and cutscene to set up Blue Stinger's story. In the year 2000, an earthquake caused an island to rise out of the ocean. This island was the exact size of the meteor that hit the Earth and wiped out the dinosaurs, so it was naturally named Dinosaur Island. Scientists set up a research post and have been studying the island for many years. As the game begins, we meet Elliot G. Ballard, a member of the Emergency Sea and Rescue Organization, or ESA for short. It's Christmas Eve and he's enjoying some chill time with his Nephilim-obsessed buddy on a boat just off the island when something crashes down from space and hits the island. The explosion causes some sort of bubble to go up around the island, which Elliot's boat gets stuck in. A light approaches and takes the form of the Nephilim in a bottle that Tim, whose arm is caught in the bubble, is holding before a swarm of monsters fly into the boat and explode for some reason. Lying unconscious on a dock at the island, Elliot is given a vision by Nephilim, who then promptly flies away and the game can begin in earnest. It's in this moment, as Blue Stinger transitions to gameplay for the first time, that we're introduced to the most persistent enemy in the game, a foe that will stalk you throughout every level. I'm talking about the camera. This is the first shot you're shown when you take control of Blue Stinger, a lovely view of the top of Elliot's spiky head. Starting out, I didn't quite realize just how much the camera would screw me throughout the rest of the game, but I was given a quick preview. After getting to grips with the basic movements, solving a rudimentary puzzle, meeting a new character, more on him in a moment, and grabbing a gun and a keycard, we move on to the first proper area of the game. Dodging around some enemies, we learn that the brake system for one of the shuttles is failing, and there's someone trapped inside. We need to find and reactivate the brakes before the shuttle plummets and explodes, killing the trapped worker. I completely missed the shuttle controls on my first time running through this area. They're to the left of this room behind the fenced-off area, which is accessed through a doorway as you run through, but because of how the camera swung around as I turned the corner, I just didn't see the opening. And since there was nothing else to guide my vision or highlight that there was something important there, I pressed on thinking that what I needed to do might be a little further forward. It was not a little further forward. I reloaded a save to try and figure this out. Interacting with the shuttle didn't work, and I couldn't get to the control room before the countdown timer ran out. Eventually, I just looked up a guide to see what I was missing, and sure enough, it pointed me to the doorway I'd missed. Blue Stinger's camera is what I would charitably call very fucking awkward. One of the game's biggest changes from Resident Evil, among many, was to ditch fixed camera angles in favor of one that follows behind the player at all times. Or tries to. Whenever you change direction when moving, it swings around to try and position itself behind you, but it's not instantaneous. In fact, it's not even particularly quick about it. It also relies on your continued movement. If you stop moving, the camera stops swinging. On top of this, it also really struggles with walls. If you're near a wall, the camera presses itself up against it and either points downward or pushes right up against the player character, which gives the impression that Blue Stinger is uniquely fascinated by the floor or the top of Elliot's head a lot of the time. Quite a lot of this game takes place indoors, so smaller rooms and tight corridors are plentiful. As long as the camera has space, it's perfectly serviceable, if a bit annoying at times. It just rarely has the space it needs. Hopefully all this doesn't have a big impact on the combat. After saving the worker trapped in the shuttle, who gives us a napalm gun for our trouble, making me question just what the hell he was doing in the shuttle in the first place, we head up to the main control room of the island and our three protagonists meet up for a chat. These characters all met earlier. Elliot bumped into Dog's Bower near the entrance of the research facility, and they were both saved from a giant monster by Janine King and her impeccable sniping skills.
I can't believe it. Shooting from that far?
No shit.
Janine?
A woman?
Dogs is the captain of the island supply ship and the second playable character. You can switch between him and Elliot at any point in the menu, and both characters come with their own separate loadout. In fact, his starting weapon, the crossbow, seemed to be more powerful than Elliot's pistol, so Dogs kind of carried through the first part of the game, so get used to seeing him on screen for a bit. Janine is the last surviving member of the security team on Dinosaur Island. She mostly stays in the control room throughout the game due to an injured leg, keeping in touch with Elliot and Dogs on their codex. She's a computer expert, a crack sniper, and the only character whose dialogue doesn't consistently make me roll my eyes so hard they almost shoot out the back of my head. One kind of interesting tangent I found while I was researching this game, Elliot, Dogs, and Janine are voiced by the actors of Sonic, Eggman, and Rouge in the Sonic Adventure games. Lanny Minella, the voice of Janine, has had an extremely prolific career, credited in hundreds of games over the past 30 plus years. There's a pretty high chance that you've heard her voice in something. It kind of blew my mind when I saw that she was the voice of Eve in Mass Effect 3.
You can stay here and let old wounds fester as Krogan have always done. Or you can fight the enemy you were born to destroy and win a new future for our children. I choose to fight.
Anyway, while I was explaining all that, Nephilim turned up. Janine immediately opens fire.
It won't work. You can't hit her.
What is that thing?
Introductions out of the way, the gang try to figure out what's going on with the meteor strike and the monsters all over the island. Janine tries to bring up some files on the computer, but needs a lab ID to access them. According to Dogs, the owner of Rat's Bar can get you anything you need for a price, so he and Elliot set off to acquire the necessary ID. Nephilim also decides to tag along. The great thing about Nephilim is that she flies around at random and makes it extremely hard to see because she just blocks your view all the time. And in exchange, you get nothing. She doesn't help you fight monsters. She doesn't heal you. She doesn't buff you. She literally just gets in the way or distracts your vision on a whim. Elliot and Dogs find that a safety wall is blocking their path to Rat's bar. There is an alternative path through the freezers, and Dogs reckons that the owner of Hello Market will have the ID card they need to open the door, so we're off to Hello Market. One of the things that remains iconic about the original Resident Evil games is their atmosphere, and a huge part of successfully building that atmosphere is music. You've been listening to it in the background of this video up until now. It builds an air of tension. Even in rooms where there are no monsters, the music keeps you on edge as you progress, always keeping you in an uneasy mindset, which is the perfect mindset for a survival horror. Conversely, this is the music that assaulted me when I set foot in the Hello Market area of the island for the first time. It's definitely different. This music is relentless whenever you're in the Hello Market section. If I forget everything else about Blue Stinger, I will never forget this song. It's been playing on a loop in my head since I first heard it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's a bad song. It's a very jolly, upbeat, Christmassy song. I think it's giving the right vibes for what the game is going for, and honestly, it's kind of charming in a goofy way to blast mutated monsters while this was ringing through my headphones. What caught me off guard and made this such a memorable track is the juxtaposition of my expectations of what Blue Stinger is versus the numerous comparisons to Resident Evil I saw going into it. The Hello Market theme is also very much of an outlier on the OST as well. Exploring the back rooms of the store, you get this.
Gotcha!
Which is much more traditional action game style music. Again, not quite fitting a horror type atmosphere, but closer to what I'd expect to hear in a game where mutated monsters are trying to kill me. This isn't a knock against Blue Stinger's soundtrack, simply a note that the game is aiming for a totally different vibe than Resident Evil. Inside the market, we find the owner quite quickly. He's lying on the floor of the employee lounge after having a seizure because he's run out of a medicine he needs called Doxin. This starts another timed side quest, similar to saving the worker from the shuttle, albeit with a much more lenient timer. The idea with side quests is to work on them alongside progressing the main objective, which in this case is to find the market's assistant manager, who actually has the keycard we're looking for, and the place you find him also has the Doxin. Side quests make a nice accompaniment to Blue Stinger's otherwise fairly traditional mission structure of finding keys or solving puzzles to unlock doors. The timers are generous enough that they don't feel overbearing while still adding a good sense of pressure, and the extra weapons are worth going out of your way for, is what I would be saying, but this is the last side quest in the game. I'm not sure why the game stops having side quests after the first two major areas, but it was disappointing that they were dropped, as they were one of the more interesting mechanics in the game. As for the main objective, we need to complete Hello Market's Christmas stamp rally, which will allow us to access the bargain floor. This sends us to all corners of the market looking for the hidden cartoon characters we need to complete our stamp card.
Pin Pin Tina! Pin Pin Sparky! Taco Pin Sneak! Toto Pin Back!
As well as into the back areas to find some extra items that are incredibly well hidden thanks to Blue Stinger's extremely dodgy camera and unlock the store's security shutters. Stamp rally complete, we head up to the special bargain floor of the market, immediately running into our first mini-boss. I want to take some more time to complain about Blue Stinger's camera again, because fighting through the extremely narrow hallways of Hello Market and then fighting this mini-boss really begun to hammer home just how much of a problem it is. We've already covered how the camera moves around in a way that makes it difficult to see anything important. I feel like the reason this is bad when you're fighting monsters should go without saying. All of the monsters you fight are trying to rush you down at beat you to death, which necessitates retreating unless you have a weapon with knockback. However, when you move, the camera doesn't immediately reposition behind you. So what ends up happening almost all of the time you're fighting is that you end up facing the camera, which is pointing behind you and away from the enemy you're trying to shoot. The result is you end up fighting most monsters while they're off screen, giving yourself some space from an enemy that's bearing down on you, spinning around and hoping your shots are actually connecting. There's a mild lock-on mechanic. It's barely noticeable and only really comes into play when you're fighting the game's small flying enemies. But where in Resident Evil the lock-on mechanic will spin you to face whatever direction a monster is in Blue Stinger you pretty much have to already be facing the right direction for the lock-on to even work. What Blue Stinger really needed to make this camera work was to give the player the ability to control it. You can sort of do this if you hold the trigger, you'll enter a first-person mode, but I never really found it practical to use in a fight. There was no way for the developers to give players any meaningful control over the camera, as unfortunately the Dreamcast controller only has one analog stick. I think someone really cool and smart made a video about this once. Anyway, mini-boss defeated, we make it into the main shopping area of Hello Market, which is stacked to the rafters with energy drinks, various foods, life-saving medication, and powerful weaponry and ammunition. Everything you need to fill your loved one's stockings this Christmas. It's at this point that the option to grind for some of the more powerful weapons in the game becomes available. All of the mutated enemies you defeat drop money. Well, they actually explode in a shower of gold coins that you need to run over and pick up, which is as spectacular as it is mildly annoying. And the mutated enemies also respawn whenever you leave a room and come back, allowing you to keep killing them over and over for even more cash. I opted not to bother grinding. Aside from my issues with the camera, the game hasn't really been too difficult up to this point. There isn't much of an incentive to actually do this other than to have more powerful weapons for the sake of having them, or for spending more time listening to the game's banger of a Christmas theme. But I'd much rather just use what money I'm earning to stay stocked up on healing items and ammo for the weapons I already have, and simply continue on with the game. This also kind of mutes any pretense that this game is a survival horror. While Hello Market is the place to buy powerful weapons and healing items, all of the save rooms will usually have vending machines that allow you to buy ammo for the less powerful weapons in your arsenal, usually the pistol, shotgun, and bowgun, as well as energy drinks for healing. There isn't really much need for ammo or health item management. If you begin to run low on either, there'll be a vending machine close by where you can restock. Your inventory is also bottomless, so there's no need to juggle items or stress over what combinations of weapons and key items you should be carrying. It's at this point that a thought I'd been mulling over for the past few hours finally coalesced. I don't think it's a spoiler to suggest here that the answer to the question posed by the video's title is no, Blue Stinger is obviously not Dreamcast's Resident Evil beer. But as I was spending my relatively meager earnings on all the energy drinks and shotgun shells I could stuff into the pockets of Elliot's skinny jeans, I realized that Blue Stinger isn't really very much like Resident Evil at all. All of the comparisons I've made to Resident Evil so far have been lifted directly from my notes, which I was writing as I was playing. I mean, the entire premise of this video was built around these comparisons because I'd only ever seen the game talked about in relation to Resident Evil. But it was at this point, a few hours in, that it was abundantly clear that Blue Stinger isn't actually even trying to be anything like Resident Evil. It's not that Resident Evil is a better game or Blue Stinger is failing to live up to the Resident Evil games that came before. They are trying to be two very different types of experience. One, a tense survival horror, the other, an action game. Continuing to even compare them to each other feels very disingenuous. With this realization turning over in my brain, I headed over to the freezer. It's so cold in there that you rapidly lose body heat, indicated by a new bar underneath your health. Once that bar is depleted, you start losing health until you die. You need to navigate the tight corridors to find safe rooms that replenish your body temperature and contain keys and items needed to progress to the next safe room, dodging monsters as you go because fighting them is precious time you probably don't have. The freezer is an idea that seems more interesting in concept than execution. The level is too linear, and the body temperature mechanic forces you to rush through it, rather than providing an interesting mechanical challenge of any kind. When you get near the end of the first big section, you either turn left and run into a dead end and die, go forward and run straight to the boss and die, or turn right and find the item that nullifies the body temperature mechanic and live. That's not interesting use of game mechanics, that's a coin flip. Wait, coins don't have three sides. It's a dice roll. Is there such a thing as a D3? It's like a game of rock, paper, scissors. Except if you lose, Blue Stinger murders you. So yeah, you find the doohickey that keeps you warm and then run into the boss fight. If you're surprised that I'm this deep into the video before I've mentioned the phrase boss fight, Sam. I'd been playing for so long without fighting a boss, I just figured the game didn't have any. Each boss fight, though, taught me a valuable lesson. The first one is that Blue Stinger's boss fights are extremely simple. The strat for this, and almost every subsequent boss, is to run in a circle, occasionally turning to shoot the boss when you're relatively safe, praying that you've flicked the analog stick in just the right direction that the shot hits. The boss goes down and we reset the freezer temperature controls to normal, which defrosts the other doors and allows us to proceed on a rat's bar. Apparently you can also set the temperature to air fryer mode, melting the ice, flooding the freezer, bringing back the body temperature mechanic and unfreezing a tough optional enemy. Since we're definitely not ready to experience Blue Stinger's swimming mechanics, and I'm definitely not interested in fighting more than I have to, we'll leave it as it is, although I leave with a lot of questions about who designed this freezer. George Trevor? We emerge in the entertainment district, stopping by the ladies' restroom to pick up a railgun. I know I'm always leaving my futuristic sci-fi weapons in the toilets. Inside the arcade we find a crying girl. She's not crying because the city she lives in has become overrun by monsters, or because she can't find her parents, but because she wants the stuffed animal from the Jungle Hunter shooting game. Since we obviously have nothing better to do, we put a coin in the machine and prepare for the challenge of Jungle Hunter. 3 totally stationary animal targets appear and we have to shoot them. Since the arcade machine comes with no gun of any kind, I assume the difficulty of winning the game comes from needing to bring your own from home. Maybe that's why there was a railgun in the toilets. The Grateful Child gives Elliot a clue of, it's Christmas Eve. It turns out this is the passcode for the door out of the arcade, 1224, and we make even more progress to Rat's Bar, stopping at the bank on the way to withdraw the $20 that Elliot has in his account, which is the most, if not only, relatable thing about Elliot. Although given that his PIN number is also his employee number, I'm not really surprised his account is empty. Heading into Rat's Bar, we meet the man himself and secure the ID we came all this way for, as well as a key for the fishing shop we passed. Which is good, because there are piranhas blocking our way back to Janine, and the healthy-looking individual enjoying a spot of fishing out the back just happens to have some piranha kill. He lets us borrow it. He's a cool dude. I'm not sure I can describe in words just how awkward the swimming is in this game. Have you ever had this happen to you? You've come across a game mechanic that's so clumsily implemented that words don't do it justice, and the only way for someone else to fully grasp it is for them to play the game themselves? It's an unusual position for me to be in, considering words about games is kind of my whole thing. Instead of pointing Elliot in a direction, pushing a button, and having him swim in that direction, pushing B makes Elliot swim forward. You can turn him very slowly, but you can't swim up or down. You can either sink by not pushing B, or swim directly up by pushing B without touching the analog stick. And you'll need to swim up regularly because when you're swimming on the surface, it never occurs to him that he can lift his head to breathe. He just stays face down until he drowns. It is just Elliot too. Dogs can't swim. The character, not the animal. He can't even walk through a very small puddle, as you can see from this later section of the game, where I got very confused about running into what I thought was an insane invisible wall. You're probably wondering about the Santa suit. We'll get there. We'll get there. Speaking of getting there, we're back at the command center. Janine tries to use the ID you got to get some answers, but first the boys need to go to the power plant and restore power. Heading back out, I take a left instead of going straight on and run into another boss fight, which brings me to boss fight lesson number 2. Boss fights kind of just happen out of nowhere with little rhyme or reason. Seriously, there's no point in coming this way. It's a dead end. Unless you want to pick up a Gatling gun for dogs, a weapon which has exactly one use, which we'll get into much later. The boss is a giant crab using a jeep as a shell, and it dies very easily to the circle strafing strategy, so, it's fine. In fact, the entire power plant section of the game is fairly unremarkable, so I'm just going to skip over most of it. There are 2 gimmicks in the power plant. The first is finding and repairing broken wires. You have to find the correct circuits in the correct rooms by reading the error messages in the power plant control room and matching them to the right section letters and circuit numbers, except that you're forced to explore all of the other rooms to find the items you need to actually repair the circuits. It's another example of Blue Stinger having an interesting idea and immediately undercutting itself, which is a point I already pressed on when talking about the freezer section, so I'm just going to note it and move on. The second gimmick is one I actually managed to undercut myself. The power plant is full of narrowish walkways that you can fall off, but I managed to navigate the entire area without incident despite the camera and controls actively working against me. I briefly considered the possibility that I was becoming one with the game or actually getting good at it, But then I was thrust into this encounter where I had to fight a group of electrified flying enemies that was so infuriatingly cumbersome, I almost quit the game entirely. Leaving the power plant thrusts us into another boss fight against another crab using a vehicle as a shell, but in a much tighter space, so it's time for boss lesson number 3. Healing in combat is basically impossible. There are various items of food and drink in Blue Stinger that serve as healing items, but because of how healing works, you basically can't do it if you're in combat. To heal, you pop into the menu and use a consumable. You're then kicked back out into the game and have to watch a very slow animation of Elliot or dogs eating or drinking, which also has an insane end lag as you watch them pat their belly. At first I assumed this was a way to convey satisfaction, but given that the diet consists of burgers and energy drinks they find lying on the floor, it may have something to do with digestive distress. Once the animation is complete, you heal over time. This becomes hella problematic because you're essentially locked in place for several seconds, so in most boss fights, healing essentially gives the boss a free hit on you. I gave the boss fights some shit earlier for being incredibly simple and easy, but given you have to do them without taking enough damage to enter Blue Stinger's version of caution and start moving slowly, that might actually be a godsend. Jeep Crab number 2 defeated, we head back to the command center once again, and Janine has an encounter with Nephilim. Between Janine's vision and the information they're able to glean from the ID, it's time to head to the island's lab and find out what the heck they were doing over there that could have caused all of this to happen. But first, the cutscene is careful to mention about 20 times that it's past midnight, which means it's officially Christmas Day. Merry Christmas, you filthy animals. Christmas Day is also Elliot's payday. We picked up a bunch of extra bank cards that were just lying around, and a key to Omega Club, which is near the arcade. The Omega Club, it turns out, is this very professional and realistic Research Islands strip club. There isn't a show on, but there is a lightsaber in the back room. Yes, a lightsaber. In the strip club. I'm really starting to come around on this game. After heading to the bank and using all the bank cards we've collected, we've got about 20 grand to spend. So it's time to head back to the Hello Market bargain floor to clean the place out. Which means more time with the song I'm starting to become Stockholm Syndrome into believing is one of the greatest of video game history. If Blue Stinger had any pretense whatsoever of being a survival horror game, it definitely flies out the window after you're able to buy all of the most powerful weapons in the game, the maximum amount of ammo for them, a bunch of health upgrades, and all the hamburgers 2 growing boys could eat. The game didn't have a particularly challenging difficulty curve before this, but I definitely annihilated it by being able to just buy everything I need for the best weapons in the game. Now that we're fully stocked and loaded, it's time to make our way to the lab. We even get our own Jeep, but unfortunately it doesn't come with a crab. The boys are immediately blocked from entry because they need to be decontaminated and be wearing clean suits, and the highly futuristic 2020 technology can detect they are neither. Now, I know what a clean suit looks like. For anyone that doesn't know, it looks like this. Super useful for heading into a lab, especially one where there's been some kind of outbreak that is causing humans to mutate into monsters. We find some clean suits that look nothing like clean suits, but they don't fit dogs. Luckily, there's an alternative close at hand. Yeah, this should end well. One requirement down, the boys head into the bathroom and take a bath. Quite literally. This is how they decontaminate themselves. I'm not even questioning anything that's happening at this point. I've been thoroughly worn down by the ridiculousness of everything that's happened, submitting myself to the game's special blend of absurdity. And I mean that in a complimentary way. So, I've made no secret of the fact that I find a lot of the dialogue aggravating. Most of that's centered around Elliot, not the voice actor. I love the voice acting in this game. The character dynamics of Blue Stinger revolve around Elliot being an insufferable creep, Dogs being sick of his shit, and Janine trying to keep the plot going while doing her best to ignore Elliot's creepy advances. I cannot stress enough how unlikable Elliot is. His dialogue is constantly just clearly unwanted advances towards Janine, whether he's talking to her or about her. At a certain point, he starts calling her hun or sweetheart in a way that made my skin crawl every time he said it. I mean, this writing does come from the studio who, according to the Sega Saturn Magazine preview that started all of this, said their studio of 18 is all men. They claim women would only distract them from their work. I don't know if anyone at Climax actually said that, or if it was editorialized by the writers of the magazine, a magazine which comes from the era of horny and misogynistic journalism aimed at young boys, lest I remind you of the Dead or Alive 2 preview I teased earlier. But that claim makes a lot of sense given Elliot's total inability to be anything other than a creep. But as the boys get ready for their bath, we get this exchange.
I'm gonna take a bath. Nothing's gonna stop me.
What you'll do if the monster attacks you while you're butt naked?
I'll fight back butt naked. Stop whining. Let's jump in the tub.
I'm not sure if this is such a good idea.
Hey, in the tub we go. Taking a bath in the middle of a battlefield. Ain't that cool?
Well, I guess.
Hey, you're more macho than I thought.
Shut up.
This really caught me off guard. Where was this banter for the rest of the game? Why do I have to listen to dogs being surprised that a woman can shoot a gun or Elliot being Elliot, when I could have had a genuinely goofy and charming back and forth between the two playable lead characters? Ugh. Anyway, the boys make it into the lab and are almost immediately attacked by a giant slime monster. Elliot swallows some of its bile in the fight and begins mutating himself, which would not have happened if he'd been wearing an actual clean suit. Dogs offers multiple times throughout this level to mercy kill him if he turns into a monster, and I briefly get to live in hope that maybe I can be rid of Elliot. But no, this kicks off a timed sequence where you have to cure Elliot or get a game over. This presents us with the gimmick of the lab level. As Elliot mutates, he gains the ability to climb on surfaces. Very specific surfaces. The controls are, as you might expect by this point, incredibly clunky. Crawling upside down across ceilings and between different floors make the lab an absolute nightmare, especially with a 2D map that isn't layered in any way and a countdown that necessitates rushing, although the timer is very generous. I don't want to give the impression that I'm rushing through my recap of the game, but you've heard everything I could possibly say about this level before. Bad camera, bad movement, bad combat, etc., etc. The frustrations are mitigated somewhat by my being tooled up with the game's best weapons, but I don't want to beat you over the head with the same points. The lab ends with a really long gauntlet of rooms filled with enemies, which mercifully gives me the opportunity to simply run past everything and make it to the next scene of plot exposition, wherein it turns out that the meteorite that hit Earth and created Dinosaur Island 20 years earlier was an egg. The egg contains a creature that scientists named Dinocyte, and it's about ready to hatch into a giant world-destroying kaiju. The second meteorite is actually Nephilim, who came to Earth to stop Dinocyte, but it got stuck on one of the emergency doors and needs our help to get through and kill Dinocyte before it hatches. Oh, and Elliot is cured. Hooray. We have to run all the way back through the gauntlet and lab to get to the command center to learn that Janine has a plan, but first we have to get a sniper rifle from her apartment. Despite the fact that she already has one because she used it in the opening to save Elliot and dogs from a... You know what, I'm just going to go with it at this point. I honestly don't have too much to say about the apartment level. There's a boss fight as you enter, it's the easiest one yet. The charging enemy on the street outside was harder because with these controls and this camera, an enemy that charges straight at you is way more dangerous than one you can easily circle straight to death. But the reason I don't have that much to say is that this is the simplest level of the game. There is no gimmick, it's just a level you explore, finding keys and killing monsters. You can't get straight into Janine's apartment because her neighbors reprogrammed her lock to force her to come to their Christmas party. When you reach their apartment, you find them dead, which they honestly deserve for playing that bullshit. Getting to Janine's apartment, we find the sniper rifle, and also learn that Doug's is Janine's estranged father. Which doesn't add a great deal to the story, aside from the fact that if I had been Doug's in this moment and listened to everything Elliot had said about my daughter this entire time, I would have thrown him back in the ocean. The plan is set. As the most quotable Ghostbuster would say, we have the tools, we have the talent. Now we just have to get to a place where Janine can shoot out the hydraulic pumps holding the last few emergency doors in place so that the meteorite can make it to the egg and Nephilim can stop the Dinocyte. We need to get to the wave tower, which is tall enough for Janine to get the shots off. Thankfully, there's a pod we can take straight there. Unfortunately, the pod only holds 2 people. Elliot elects to let Dogs and Janine use the pod because Dogs can't swim, and Janine has an injured leg. Thankfully, for the sake of what's left of my sanity, you don't actually have to do much swimming in the next section. The tunnel you need to make your way through has workable platforms along the sides, so you can just run most of the way. At the other end, Elliot gets a call from Janine telling him they're stuck in the elevator halfway up, but there's a control box at the top he can use to get it going again. I'm not sure why there wouldn't also be one at the bottom where it could be accessed by people who aren't Spider-Man, but it gives us our next objective. Climbing the tower turns out to be quite treacherous, and I do actually fall off a couple of times. This is where I learned what those life hooks the game gave me earlier actually do. Basically, they allow you to fall, but be fine. I'm glad I didn't use them earlier. We reach the roof of the tower, fix the elevator so that Dogs and Janine can join us, and let Janine get set up. She'll need exactly 3 minutes and 45 seconds to successfully make the shots, and coincidentally the roof tower is attacked by mutants that we need to hold off for that long. Not in a thrilling wave defense gaming segment, it's just these two mutants who were inexplicably invincible for the next 3 minutes and 45 seconds. I initially struggled with this segment until I realized that this is the entire reason the Gatling gun exists. Its firing art, rate of fire, lack of a reload animation, and knockback completely trivialized this part of the game. It does use a strange camera angle, which is probably the only thing that makes this fight bearable. I can't imagine trying to do this with Blue Stinger's trademark camera. I wonder where they got the idea to use this camera in this one specific part of the game. It is just this for almost 4 minutes though. It's exactly as tedious as it looks. Anyway, once the timer runs down, Elliot and Dogs literally drop the mutants off the side of the tower, Janine takes the last shot, and the meteorite goes the rest of the way down and hits the egg. Unfortunately, it's too late and the egg hatches. A giant dinosaur emerges and Nephilim takes on her kaiju form and does battle with it. Why she couldn't do this the entire time and help us get through the game, I have no idea, but again, I'm not questioning anything at this point. She does get some good hits in, but loses, I think. It's not actually clear from the cutscene what actually happens. Regardless of what happens in that cutscene, the gang descends back down the tower and the giant dinosaur bursts through a wall, which genuinely makes me wonder what the point of Nephilim in the game actually was. She doesn't really do anything, and her whole deal was to stop the dinosaur, which we now have to do in the game's final boss fight. And I mean, immediately, right now. Any damage you took in that previous fight, that carries over. And remember what I said about how difficult it is to heal in combat? Because of how this fight works, it is actually possible to heal, but it's incredibly tight, and given how low on health he is, it quickly becomes apparent to me that I won't be able to use Dogs for this boss fight. It's fine though, because Elliot has the weapon I want to use for this fight anyway. It turns out you can't circle strafe a dinosaur this big, but the fight is almost as simple. Essentially, the dinosaur will attack in one of 3 directions: left, center, or right. The idea of the fight is to run to one side, bait an attack, and run to the other side to get an attack of your own off. The only attack the boss does is to breathe fire, and the hitbox for the fire spills over into the neighbouring section, so you need to time your movement well not to get hit. The boss can also stomp the ground if you get too close, but it's quite easy to not get too close, and also, who is going to charge towards a giant dinosaur? I'm not Jeff Goldblum, this isn't Jurassic Park, and I have a bazooka, not a road flare. There is a phase 2 when the boss gets to half health, which is a hilarious transition where the boss stomps its feet like it's having a tantrum and partly falls through the floor. This doesn't meaningfully change the boss fight in any way, in fact it makes it slightly easier since you can't get stomped on anymore, but literally everything else stays the same. Eventually, with a bazooka in one hand and a hamburger in the other, Elliot defeats the final boss. We get the ending where Nephilim finishes off the giant dinosaur before returning to her home planet or whatever, and all is right with the world. More importantly, we learn that Tim is fine. Remember Tim? Me neither. And that was Blue Stinger. There's a post-credits teaser for a sequel. I always hate it when sequels are teased after the credits. A sequel never materialized, not yet anyway. Maybe Sega's Super game will turn out to be Blue Stinger 2, Nephilim's Revenge. Editing Amy here. I wrote that line in the script right before Sega cancelled the Super game, which is such a weird coincidence I decided to leave the joke in the video. Anyway, with Blue Stinger complete, my curiosity has been completely sated. I could say for certainty that it was not in fact Dreamcast's Resident Evil beta, which admittedly is something I figured out almost immediately, since Resident Evil is a franchise that persists to this day, and there were no more Blue Stinger games after this, and also the Dreamcast had its own Resident Evil game. But that would have been a much shorter and much less entertaining video to make, so instead you got this. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Hold on a minute, why is there still so much time left on this video? I keep coming back to this headline on the cover of the magazine. Even after playing the game, it still bothers me. Probably a little bit more so than before I started playing. My first and most obvious question was, had the people who wrote and approved this headline ever actually played Resident Evil? If you're even a little bit familiar with the PS1 Resident Evil games, I'm sure you must have noticed that Blue Stinger is almost nothing like those games. If you're not familiar with those games, hopefully the footage I've been playing over the top of these paragraphs kind of gives you enough of an idea that Resident Evil and Blue Stinger are not very much alike. I mean, it bothered me so much I stopped making the comparison in my notes before I even got halfway through the game. It was while I was doing my research that the reason for the Resident Evil comparisons came into sharp focus, at least pre-release. I stumbled across a video called The Lost Cinematography of Blue Stinger by Hyperbit Hero. In the video, Hyperbit Hero talks about the camera changes between the Japanese and Western version of the game. Yeah, the camera that I spent probably too long complaining about wasn't actually how the camera worked in the Japanese release. That version of the game featured fixed camera angles, much like the original Resident Evil games. The one major difference was that rather than cutting between different camera angles, Blue Stinger's camera would switch to new camera angles in real time, which also explains why the opening paragraph of the Sega Saturn Magazine preview describes Blue Stinger as a real-time Resident Evil clone, which also hilariously implies that Resident Evil is a turn-based game. Looking at the screenshots in the magazine preview, you could actually see the fixed camera angles. And also that whoever took the screenshots looked like they're about to solve the arcade shooting gallery with a bazooka, which is a move I can get behind. I can't speak to how much better Blue Stinger might play with fixed camera angles, if at all, as I only played the Western version of the game. In my version of the game, we started with a very focused look at the top of Elliot's head, an ill omen for what lay ahead of me. In the opening shot of the Japanese version of the game, we get a fantastic view of the opening harbour, which seems like it does a better job of setting up the world you're about to explore. Hyperbit Hero's video is filled with comparisons that make me wish I'd grabbed the Japanese version of the game instead. I don't want to rehash the entire video here, I've linked it in the description, and I think you should give it a watch after you finish watching this. But it wasn't just in previews or at the time of release that these comparisons were being made. The scant few articles, both print and online, that I could find that talked about Blue Stinger in the years after it came out also couldn't help making the comparison, usually downgrading it from a Resident Evil beta to a Resident Evil clone or some such. As a gaming community, we have a tendency to try and put everything in boxes, and to try and have as few boxes as possible. It can be useful shorthand, taking something someone is already familiar with to help them quickly conceptualize what a game is. I mean, if I was so inclined, I'd probably call Blue Stinger a janky proto-Dead Space, an action horror from a time before the action horror genre existed, with some similar ideas that would be revisited in the years that followed, but with the caveat that it's nowhere near as polished or confident as those later games that would come to define the genre. But the idea that Blue Stinger could be a Resident Evil beta, or that Dead Space could be a Blue Stinger beta, or that any of these games are clones of any of the others, is a toxic mindset, one that's been passed down throughout the generations of gaming coverage, and one that we should really do better to expel from our conversations. It's the mindset of the executive class, people who see art as something to be won, video games not as creations or artistic visions, but as products that are only worthwhile if they generate more and more revenue. It's a mindset that's infected the gaming community, one that keeps us locked in arguments about review scores, about concurrent player counts, cultural impact, sales numbers. We rank games, or see how others rank games, and take those rankings way too seriously, and then start fights about how the rankings are objectively wrong. Constantly comparing games across a variety of metrics that are completely unimportant in order to prove that our favourite games are better than everybody else's. It often feels like the fights and the arguments are the point. People go out of their way to make their hot takes or put their points across in an adversarial way. Arguments like that were fine when we were children and didn't know any better. I'm definitely guilty of getting into my fair share of console war arguments when I was a teenager. Genesis does what Nintendo don't, which is the actual quote, by the way, not Sega does what Nintendo don't. I see it misquoted all the time, so write that down. Art is not competitive, or at least it shouldn't be. Going into Blue Stinger with the mindset of comparing it to Resident Evil at every turn sounds like a great way to have a miserable experience. If you're on the lookout for all of the ways it falls short or beats Resident Evil, you'll miss the game that you're actually playing. I personally didn't enjoy Blue Stinger as much as the 2 Resident Evil games that preceded it, but I did have a good time playing it. Despite all the criticisms I offered up throughout this video, and I stand by all of those critiques, Blue Stinger won me over in its ridiculousness. It's got a goofy charm that I found irresistible despite its janky awkwardness. Trust me, I would not have put 10 hours into playing it and however many more hours it takes to finish making this video if I didn't have a good time playing it. Contrary to popular belief, I am not that kind of masochist. I also found the game to be quite forward-thinking in a few ways. The Western release broke the mold of the survival horror genre at a time when the popular consensus was that fixed camera angles and tank controls were overplayed. You won't find a bigger defender of tank controls than me, but you can spot some of the directions the likes of Resident Evil 4 and Dead Space would take the horror genre in the 2000s. And the shop kiosks you find in Hello Market and the various safe rooms where you can buy new weapons, ammo, healing items, and health upgrades are staple features of those so-called groundbreaking games. Blue Stinger didn't implement those ideas particularly well, but they are in here. But to bring us all the way back round to the central thesis of this video, and finally answer the question, is Blue Stinger Dreamcast's Resident Evil beta? It's a question that's not even worth asking. Thank you very much for watching. Oh man, that was a lot of fun. I wonder if the Blue Stinger team ever made any other insane horror games for the Dreamcast.
4 high school teenagers received an invitation to the horror theme park. He'll bleed. Erica Christie, Michelle Waters, Kevin Kurtzman, Randy Fairbanks. Whoever can clear all of the stages will receive $100 million. But under the guise of amusement lies a homicidal theme park. He'll bleed.
Oh hell yes. We are so back.